Scootaloo whirled around, training her flashlight at where she just came from. No pony there again. She let out a long sigh. She was trying not to be jumpy, but it was easier said than done. For the first time, Scootaloo was glad she was alone. There was no pony there to see her freak out at every sound. No pony to laugh and roll their eyes every time she almost dropped her flashlight in alarm. She kept going, aiming her flashlight at the path in front of her. The cemetery was a lot different under Luna's light, and the semi-darkness. Every grave and statue looked malevolent shape, looming over the corner of Scootaloo's vision. Fortunately, she's gotten used to this. Unfortunately, she still almost screamed at every sound. Scootaloo knew it was probably nothing, or at least it had been so far, but she'd always checked. Scootaloo shook her head to clear it, remembering her mission. What was it that Featherweight and the others had said? Something about to top off a hill. Oh, right. She was supposed to go to the top of the hill and place something on the base of the statue. Something small but important to her. An object she otherwise would have been reluctant to part with. They needed to know she'd actually had been there, and she'd taken the same seriously, according to Featherweight, and all the other high schoolers had already done it. Scootaloo looked around again, swinging her flashlight from side to side. She hadn't heard anything at that time, but she was getting nervous again. She was certain that she still was the groundskeeper, sulking around earlier, hidden just barely out of sight by one of those statues. The fact that he disappeared was worrying Scootaloo. Where had that shovel-winding old stallion gone? He was about to pop her up and yell at her for being in the cemetery at night. No pony ever went to the top of the hill. It was the older part of the graveyard, about as old as Granny Smith. According to Featherweight, most of the graves were unmarked. The only thing of interest at the top of the hill was the statue. No pony was sure which grave the statue was supposed to mark. Only it had been there since the early days of the cemetery. Scootaloo had never been up the hill before. She looked around once more, before starting up the hill. If that groundskeeper was waiting for her up there, she wasn't sure what she'd to do. Flee? Drop the item that she had brought with her and leave? Scootaloo doubted her friends would believe the story about being scared off by a groundskeeper. They assumed that she chickened out. Scootaloo wasn't letting a reputation like that follow her until graduation. Deep breaths, she mumbled around the flashlight. Deep breaths, Scootaloo. She tried to breathe as deeply as she walked, aware of the soft grass under her hooves. Scootaloo didn't allow herself to stop. She knew that if she paused, she'd likely stay frozen until Celestia raised the sun. Against her better judgment, she couldn't do that. If nothing else, she needed to at least see the statue. A few minutes later, Scootaloo reached the top of the hill. She would have reached it sooner, but she had been walking at a decreased pace the entire night. She told herself it was to avoid attracting the groundskeeper's attention, but actually she was just scared of making noise. Every time her hoof came down on a twig or a puddle, Scootaloo would stifle a cry in alarm. Even the sound of her own hooves was far too loud in the silence. She saw the unmarked graves first. There were about 5 or 7 of them, spread out in a rather haphazard pattern. She had expected none of them to have names or dates. However, a few of them had pictures. The pictures told her nothing about the ponies buried here, but Scootaloo was confirmed by them, as some pony cared enough to differentiate the slabs of stone, even though names of the ponies were apparently of little importance. Scootaloo wondered if Granny Smith knew any of the ponies buried there, given that she had been alive back when Ponyville was founded. Maybe these were all apple graves. Shoving the morbid thought out of her head, Scootaloo tore her eyes away from the graves. Her gaze fell on something a few feet away, something that she'd failed to notice before. It was what she had come there for. There was a statue. It was larger than Scootaloo expected, about 2 times bigger than in a full-grown mare. The statue seemed to be of an earth pony. Her eyes were shut and her mouth was slightly open, as if she were singing. She was wearing a crown with feathers of flowers and a long robe. Her body was covered in thick vines, although her face remained curiously untouched by nature. At a glance, the statue seemed to be made of marble. Scootaloo approached it, sticking a hoof into the saddlebag and withdrawing her offering, a friendship bracelet Sweetie Belle had made for her as a birthday present. Scootaloo hated to part with it, but it was the most valuable thing that she had on hoof when she agreed to play the game. As much as she treasured that bracelet, Sweetie Belle could always make her another one. Scootaloo approached the statue. She was surprised to find the space before its hooves were completely bare. Where were the other offerings? Had the groundskeeper taken them away? Scootaloo hoped not. She was going to be in big trouble if the groundskeeper was around. She placed the flashlight on the ground. She didn't like it being able to see the statue's face, but she didn't have much of a choice. Scootaloo stuck the friendship bracelet in her mouth and moved a little closer to the statue. She wasn't sure whether she was supposed to place the bracelet at the statue's hooves or not. That was where the offerings were meant to go, but Scootaloo was starting to think creativity. She, surely, had put the bracelet on the statue, would be several times braver, a testament of how much bad flank she was. The school ponies would talk about her for months. Sighing, she dropped the bracelet into the statue's hooves. As much as she wanted to free herself from the reputation as a coward, Scootaloo wasn't going to risk damaging the statue. Breaking something that had been there for nearly a century before she was born wouldn't prove anything. Finished at last, Scootaloo picked up her flashlight. Finally, time to get the Tartarus out of here. She then could go brag to every pony about how brave she was. Sweetie Belle in particular would be impressed that Scootaloo actually went through with it. Scootaloo's heart pounded at the thought. Scootaloo raised the flashlight. She had heard something? A shuffle of footsteps just a few feet away? Was that the groundskeeper, skulking around like a creep? Finally ready to leave, Scootaloo didn't care too much of being seen, but she didn't want to be caught if she could help it. She stopped her beam aimed at the spot on the foot or so behind the statue. There was an image still in her brain, still a shot taken in that split-second beam that had rested on the statue's face. Scootaloo let her mind roam over what she had seen, processing the incredibly detailed picture she somehow saved for a split second before mechanically shifting the light away. It took a moment for Scootaloo to actually understand what she had seen. With the sharp details still fresh in her head, she moved the beam back to focus on the statue's face. She hastily registered as a trick of the light, but Scootaloo couldn't deny that she was seeing. The statue's face had changed. Its eyes were no longer closed and its mouth was shut. It was staring at her, its once pleasant features contorted into something otherworldly and hideous. The sight of it made Scootaloo's stomach churn. Every single line that twisted face was meticulously detailed, the features themselves suddenly harsh and sunken. It was like looking into the face of a decaying corpse that was beginning to melt along with the usual decomposition. Scootaloo nearly dropped her flashlight. What in the Tartarus? She started backing away, keeping her flashlight trained on the hideous thing in front of her. Even the vines had disappeared, leaving the statue completely bare. Scootaloo could see that its robe appeared to be tattered, and there were no longer flowers lining the ground. The difference of the image from her memory and what stood before her was staggering. She turned away and started towards the edge of the hill. Scootaloo had done her part. She had gone to the top of the hill and left the friendship bracelet. Screw everything else. Scootaloo paused when she heard the shuffle of footsteps again. The groundskeeper? She could feel compelled to turn again, letting the beam of flashlight again fall across the statue. Scootaloo's blood froze at the sight. Even though she knew it wasn't the case, she had been able to convince herself that her eyes were playing tricks on her. She told herself that the statue had always been like that. Anything else Scootaloo remembered was either a trick of the light or her mind playing tricks on her. Of course she wanted the statue to look peaceful, to ease her nerves, so her mind had projected that image over the hideous reality. It was one of those brain tricks Twilight Sparkle talked about. However, Scootaloo was now looking at something she really couldn't easily dismiss. No helpful logic explanation presented itself to her. The statue had moved, not an inch or even a half a foot. If the movement had been that slight, Scootaloo could have explained it that way. But this wasn't the trick of her nervous mind. The statue was now standing less than 2 inches away from her, its twisted face very close to her own. Scootaloo stumbled back, a screaming climbing in her throat. A whimper of fear squeezed with its past the flashlight in her mouth, as she was afraid if she actually cried out, she might drop the flashlight, even with Luna's light overhead. Scootaloo felt like she had been left in the dark. She pictured curtain of utter blackness falling over her. Scootaloo turned away again, not wanting to look at its horrible face. She stared down at the hill even faster pace, but as she fled, she could hear the shuffling footsteps again. They seemed to be closer this time, following as even she practically galloped down the hill. She paused and swung around. She expected to see the statue shambling towards her on its marble hooves, its movements stiff and unnatural as it closed the gap. But although it wasn't as close as it had been before, it didn't seem to be moving. If Scootaloo hadn't known any better, she would have believed that she imagined those past a few moments of sheer panic. If it wasn't for the fact that the statue was clearly not in its original place, Scootaloo would have started to doubt herself. Scootaloo took a step backward. Could the statue only move if she wasn't looking at it? Was it forced to stay still for as long as her eyes were on it? Was Scootaloo brave enough to test out her fury? Unfortunately, the answer to the last question was a firm no. Even if she would be able to outgallop the thing, she didn't trust it to play by the rules. She started backing away, keeping her eyes on the statue. She almost wanted to turn away from this hideous face, but Scootaloo kept eyes and the flashlight trained on it. She could feel the sweat collecting her brow as she moved. She wanted to reach up and wipe it away, but her hooves only seemed to be capable of walking at a slow pace. Scootaloo didn't even force herself to speed up, afraid she would actually automatically turn and started galloping away. She didn't want to hear those shuffling hoof steps again. A bead of sweat ran down in the middle of Scootaloo's forehead and off the edge of her muzzle. More beads started to follow. Her eyes began to water, rather involuntarily. Scootaloo blinked. The statue was now right in front of her, about an inch away from her face. Scootaloo choked on the scream, trying to scamper up in her throat. It took all of her willpower not to drop the flashlight, whirled around and started galloping for her life. She stumbled backwards on clumsy hooves, her heart beating so fast that she was actually afraid it might burst in her chest. Her eyes were burning, but Scootaloo wouldn't let herself cry. She was terrified of what may happen to her if her vision was blurred by tears. "Don't blink," she told herself. "Whatever you do, don't blink." She continued backing away, keeping the statue in her sight. Scootaloo wouldn't even look off to the side to make sure the groundskeeper wasn't there. She didn't care anymore. In fact, Scootaloo wanted the groundskeeper to find her. She wanted to be thrown out of the cemetery by an angry old stallion. She wanted her aunts to be called for this and put her on a permanent record. Scootaloo wanted to be punished for thinking it was a good idea. She wanted that red mark on her permanent record to be an eternal reminder of the evil's pure pressure and the pearl of her own ego. Scootaloo's eyes started to water again, but she kept them open. She channeled almost all of her strength into keeping her eyes open, even if they burned in protest. The rest of Scootaloo's energy went to keeping her hooves moving. She reached the bottom of the hill. Scootaloo could see the statue, but now she was much farther away. However, she was still scared to let out of her sight. Scootaloo worried of what would happen if she turned a corner and the statue was no longer in view. Would she get away with letting it out of her sight, or would it appear in front of her? Before she could ponder this horrifying idea, Scootaloo backed into something. She almost jumped, but her eyes remained trained on the statue several feet in front of her. She didn't know what to do. Scootaloo had been following the exact same path that she'd taken before. She was certain that there had been something blocking the path. She had the groundskeeper left something there while she was up on the hill. But then Scootaloo realized what it was. Her blood ran cold and the realization rose inside of her. No, it couldn't be. But as much as she wanted to shake her head and remain in denial, Scootaloo could feel the cold marble pressed against her flank. She could feel the stillness of that thing behind her, even though she thought she could hear something. A sort of dusty scratching like breath being dragged from a long unused throat. There had been another statue. Scootaloo had seen it on her way in. A big statue right beside the gate, about 2 times bigger than a grown mare. A Pegasus wearing a crown of flowers and blindfold over her eyes. Scootaloo whimpered. 2. There was 2 of them. Without thinking, she whirled around to face the statue behind her. The beam of her flashlight fell upon a distorted face that reminded her of a melted candle wax. The mouth was wide and gaping, the blindfold falling sideways to reveal a single gaping eye socket. Almost immediately, Scootaloo heard the shuffling hoof step right behind her. She knew instinctively that it was the other statue was just about 2 inches away from her. She was surrounded on both sides, unable to do anything but whimper in fear. Where in the Tartarus was the groundskeeper? Scootaloo was waiting for the blinding beam of flashlight to shine on her for a stern voice to bark out a threat. Scootaloo had no choice. She turned away from both statues and ran, darting around in front of her and galloping towards the path towards the gate. Coming to her senses, Scootaloo stopped and turned around again. She saw both statues a few inches away from her and their distorted features staring at her. They were both trapped in her vision, unable to move as Scootaloo panted and stared at them. The urge to blink had come over her twice, as strong as it normally would have been. She had somehow managed to remain wide-eyed and staring throughout this, keeping the statues in her sight when she turned around. "Don't blink," she reminded herself. "Don't blink, don't blink, don't blink." She began backing away again, mapping out the way she had come in her head. She hoped that she remembered where the gate was. Scootaloo had gone just slightly turned around during her near escape. She worried that she was trotting even deeper into the cemetery. Don't blink, don't blink, don't blink. She gave a grave that she thought looked familiar out of the corner of her eye, but she didn't really dare actually look. Don't blink, don't blink, don't blink. Scootaloo stepped on a twig. The loud snapping sound startled her, but it kept her eyes open. Her eyes were starting to hurt. Her body was screaming at her to give it in, just to blink once and elevate the torture. But she kept them wide open, kept them trained on the statues. Scootaloo was sweating nervously by this point, straining her muscles in a way that they haven't thought possible. It took all of her willpower to keep going. Don't blink, don't blink, don't blink. A trickle of sweat ran down her forehead. Scootaloo's eyes were burning and her mind seemed to be going numb with fright. Don't blink, don't blink, don't blink. She saw another statue out of the corner of her eye and nearly had a heart attack, but this one didn't seem to be following her, just at a regular statue. Don't blink, don't blink, don't blink. Was any pony going to believe Scootaloo if she told them? Or would they dismiss her crazy tale as a fragment of her imagination? Was she brave enough to return to the cemetery to prove to them? Don't blink, don't blink, don't blink. Scootaloo finally reached the gate. It was still wide open. Praise the sun, if the groundskeeper had shut and locked it, Scootaloo would have been screwed, but with the heavy padlock she had broken in just it lay on the ground. Along with the chain she made it sort of work with bolt cutters. Scootaloo blackened out through the gate. She could only barely see the statues and refused to take her eyes off of them. She kept imagining a heavy marble hoof coming down on her skull, and her head bursting open like a ripe melon on the impact. As soon as she crossed the threshold, Scootaloo took off running towards town. Now that she was out of the cemetery, she no longer cared if those things were following her. She just needed to get back to Ponyville under the lights of Nightmare Night's festival and into a nice safe crowd. Scootaloo needed to find her friends and tell them what she experienced. She didn't care if they didn't believe her. Scootaloo just needed some pony to know. Scootaloo glanced behind her only once. a second or so before the cemetery disappeared from view. She caught a glimpse of what to be a figure standing at the cemetery gate, staring at her as she fled. The figure had its hoof raised, as if trying to beckon her back. A day later, the groundskeeper was reported missing. 2 days later, both statues disappeared from Ponyville Cemetery. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Ms. Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.